I was offered the chance of arguing for this motion, but I spend my week as a clinical sexologist working with women who struggle with sex, and it is my belief that the opposite is true. The internet has broken down doors previously closed to women where sexual pleasure is concerned. Yes, it's been used by cis-het men to publish porn of questionable provenance and quality, but misogynistic literature written by men and for men is nothing new where sex is concerned. And the internet is so much more than porn. We're not debating whether porn has ruined sex tonight. We're debating whether the internet has. To your point, the motion relies on the premise that there was a glorious period in the past where we could rely confidently on expecting pleasure from our sex lives as women. Did I miss this part of history? Can we say in all seriousness that sex in the pre-internet age gave us all pleasure? Even a cursory glance back at history shows us that female pleasure has always been subject to moral judgment and control. Consider the fact that it took until 2005 to fully map the clitoris, the organ responsible for most of women's pleasure. MRI studies revealed it to have arms and bulbs extending 5 to 8 centimetres into the vagina, but for many centuries, anatomists didn't even agree that the organ existed. Instead, the idea was propagated that female pleasure was rooted in penetration, which is a handy idea, the magic of the penis being responsible for pleasure. But even when the existence of the clitoris was accepted, Freud still mooted that orgasm through penetration was a grown-up woman's choice. The discovery of the clitoris threatened the idea that the penis was the provider of all things good, and it opened up a parallel universe, leading men to fear that women may reject coital sex. God forbid what would happen if we understood we had power and choice over our own pleasure. And so began a long fight to keep women from understanding their own bodies, and this is a fight that the internet is finally allowing us to engage in and to start to win. To understand how entrenched the idea that penetration was needed for pleasure, consider that when the speculum was invented, a meeting was called to discuss the threat it posed for society. The meeting was so packed that it was standing room only, and a British doctor at the time wrote, "Young unmarried women will be reduced by the constant use of the speculum to the mental and moral condition of prostitutes." Female pleasure has always been considered dangerous, and attempts have been made to control access to and education about it. For example, in 1486, a popular guide to finding witches described the genital signs, including a prominent clitoris known as a devil's teat. In Victorian times, it was thought that prostitutes, the morally lax, and women prone to masturbation could be identified by their singularly large ones. Fast forward to the 1700s, and a book about masturbation was published, entitled Anania, the Heinous Sin of Self-Pollution. For those thinking this is only historic, let me remind you that masturbation was still a diagnosable disorder in 1965. The pill was initially only available to married women, and that homosexuality was still a diagnosis in 1990. Are we really arguing that the chances of good sex were better in the pre-internet days? So what is needed for good sex? Well, the WHO has had a definition. We need access to good quality information, knowledge to the risks of unprotected sex, access to sexual health care, and to live in an environment that both affirms and promotes sexual health. How can we ensure free and equal access to these things without the internet? In the pre-internet days, how did we learn about sex, our bodies, sexual health? How did we find other people who shared and affirmed our sexual identities? So often in clinic, patients come to tell me how little they learned about sex growing up from reliable sources, and often it's the absence of information that really teaches us a lesson. On my first day of sexology training, I was asked to consider what I had learned about sex growing up, and I would invite you to consider that for yourselves now. Did you grow up in a sex-positive home? Did you receive helpful messages about sexual pleasure, including your right to it? Did you learn the words to name your body and to talk about sex easily? It seems not. 6 in 10 men and half of women still can't accurately label a vagina. Access to sexual education and information is a lottery. If it was limited to that was available from your family of origin, your school, your religious and cultural circle, how does that affect you? I like a food analogy, and it's possible that you could be raised on a Puritan diet, being told that anything richer may upset your stomach. What then if you want to try a curry or a big bowl of pasta? How do you react to craving something different? Again, the internet is not just porn. It's education, it's connection, it's community. It has the power to unite us, to teach us, to help us feel validated. It lets us form tribes, and it magnifies our voices. There's been an explosion in websites to educate us about sex and our bodies. OMG, yes, The Pleasure Project, Sexwise, Brooke, Flow, the list is endless, includes the site that you're setting up. And with access to this, we finally have autonomy over our own ability to understand our bodies and to fill the gaps left by our upbringing. The internet is a revolutionary tool for this. It democratizes access to knowledge. There are fora that give us the opportunity to connect in community. Shame thrives in silence, and for centuries, women have borne their trauma alone. It's so easy to think that it's just us that something is happening to, but the internet has brought connection where there was isolation. We can meet other people who identify as we do, destigmatizing and validating our gender and sexual identity, which is essential for minority groups who may never have seen themselves reflected in the world around them. And we don't need to look much further than movements like Me Too, as mentioned by Orla, to see how the internet can harness the power of female lived experience and generate social change. We have sites that sell toys to intensify and extend our capacity for self-pleasure and pleasure in partner sex. Many of these incorporate educative content, helping women to learn about anatomy, to learn new ways to correct their erotic selves, and can be crucial in recovery from sexual problems. As a sexologist, I often talk about toys and healing from vaginismus, during menopause, after cancer, when we have to adapt. What about porn? This is a subject we've heard a lot about tonight in the counter-argument, and it's an area that invites strong emotions and instinctive reactions, but all porn is not homogenous. And as long as we have had cis-het men, we have borne their impact on the adult entertainment world. I'm in my 40s. I was raised at a time where this was more porn magazines under beds and in bushes. Page 3, Mills and Boon, the summary of what Charlotte was talking about in terms of men overcoming women and convincing them to have sex, very much what I had in my mum's sort of bookshelves. We just have a new platform for an age-old vibe. And what do we actually know about porn? We have to stick to evidence, and we have to separate causation from correlation. It's vital to know that women watch porn too, although they often have different patterns of use to men. Whether for solo pleasure, education, to bring novelty into partner sex, or to reconnect with yourself and heal from trauma, the right erotica can be a very good thing. And it's something I talk about a lot in my work, especially about pleasure, discovering your erotic world on your own terms. And women are shyer than men in discussing their porn use, meaning that we have been slower to steer the conversation towards content that reflects our wishes, our congruent self-expression. But this is changing. There's a growing list of female-friendly porn sites, ethical porn, amateur content, realistic bodies, minority populations. And the studies show that porn use does not lead to violence if it is watched by someone who has never had those leanings. And despite the moral panic, they're not more likely than non-users to be violent towards women. The technology has not yet been proven to be the issue here. It's the underlying issues of sexual harassment, sexism, gender inequality, which predate the internet. And there is still no evidence that porn creates these problems, rather that it reflects the views of the society that created it. Interestingly, and perhaps counterintuitively, there are even studies that show that watching porn is associated with increased body positivity towards others and gender egalitarian attitudes more aligned with feminism than with sexism. And that's where I'll leave you. Technology both reflects and helps shape the people that use it. Very often, the technology that we create expands its uses and impacts faster than our brains and cultures can adapt, leaving us behind the curve. I think this has been the case for porn, for women, and the internet. We can't blame the internet for misogynist and shaming attitudes and controlling behaviours. They have always existed. And although the web has given these attitudes larger platforms, it's also offered us, for the first time, solutions to them, in the form of access to levels of information, connection and support denied to every previous generation of women. When we can talk about things, we can change them. And so the internet brings real hope of equality in sexual pleasure, the possibility of sexual autonomy and self-knowledge, whatever your family of origin. It offers connection when we feel isolated, validation if we're carrying shame, but most of all, it gives women a voice, amplified by the voices of other women alongside us, where once we were silenced.